Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq. Joining me to discuss how Africa is dealing with COVID-19 and the current state of the continent's economy, as well as foreign direct investment opportunities for Americans, is Rosa Whitaker. She's the president and CEO of the Whitaker Group. Rosa, welcome to Trade Talks. It's truly an honor to have you join us on the show.
Thank you, Jill, and thank you for having me.
All right, you got it. And Rosa, I've covered African markets at the Voice of America, Africa 54, some local media outlets on the continent. And through the course of my coverage, particularly with the African Development Bank, the theme really has been from aid to trade to institutional investment, and more recently focusing on sustainability and access to technology. Why is Africa an attractive place to be for investment and economic growth?
Well, one of the main reasons why I am so bullish on Africa is the resiliency of the continent. And the question I'm asked most often in this season is, how will Africa come back from COVID? Because as you know, the growth projections look very good before COVID. And now with COVID, there's been a downward revisal of the GDP to a negative 1.8%. But the prospects for Africa rebounding is great. Even if we look at COVID, we're looking at 1.2 million people across the continent that have contracted COVID, 30,000 deaths, but that is far less than what was expected. Africa was projected to be an epicenter. But of course, more than the lives, there is also this concern about the damage to the livelihoods. And not to say the livelihoods are more important than the lives, but people are not dying at the rate of projections, but there's more concern about food insecurity, more concern about income losses, and I am depending on the resiliency that Africa has shown in the past. So there's a lot of policy and intellectual fermenting and innovations going on right now. For example, I'm sitting here in Ghana, and Ghana imports $100 million in food every month from the West largely, and from China. Now they know COVID has disrupted that, so now they're incentivizing import substitutions. They're incentivizing farmers to produce more. And so there's a lot of thinking and a lot of action about how Ghana and other African countries can become food sufficient. Because with 60% of the arable land, Africa can feed itself and indeed the world.
Are there some regions that are faring better than others?
I'm pretty optimistic about East Africa. East Africa is faring better, doubling the growth of the continent. And a lot of that has to do with the fact because East Africa is integrating faster in terms of its regional integration exercise. I mean, it's a robust market of 420 million people, active consumer base, and it's growing, a GDP of $880 billion, but its trade is growing. And even in the COVID era, growth prospects still look pretty promising. And when we look at the fact that the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, that Africa has been very determined that COVID will not stop the work on the Continental Free Trade Agreement. Even with that, East Africa is looking at an additional $2 billion in welfare gains just from the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement and a creation of 2 million additional jobs. So I think East Africa is promising. 3 of the fastest growing economies in the world is in East Africa. But of course, COVID has dampened some of our optimism about the entire world, and Africa has not been spared. But I go back to the resiliency. We saw in 2008 with the financial crisis that Africa was largely spared, mainly because its financial systems were not integrated with the rest of the world. But I'm believing that it will also rebound after COVID.
Yeah, I would also imagine that the Eastern Horn over there has significantly seen improvements in intermobility, which is key to building up the economy there as well. And Rosa, you were the first ever Assistant U.S. Trade Representative for Africa, a position created under President Clinton and continued under President Bush. Why do you think bipartisan consensus led to more structured U.S. Africa policy?
You know, it was amazing because during the time when we did the African Growth and Opportunity Act, there was a lot of partisanship. But we managed to bring both parties together and achieve a consensus, largely because trade made sense. I mean, we won the argument. It took nearly 5 years to do. But for the Republicans, who were largely free traders, we said, you know, if free trade is good for other regions of the world, why would it not be good for Africa? And we also were able to demonstrate to the Democrats, who generally supported development in Africa, that no region of the world had ever developed through aid only, that trade and investment were the best tools. And we won, and we even won over the labor unions. We just had the argument, and because it was bipartisan, you know, AGOA, the African Growth and Opportunity Act, has spanned now 4 presidencies, and it remains the economic cornerstone of US policy towards Africa. So I'm glad, and the position of Assistant US Trade Representative just reflected the policy change from a policy of paternalism to a policy of trade and investment and partnership.
Rosa, are you still seeing progress with the AGOA in light of COVID-19? Clearly, things are very socially and politically charged in today's environment. Do you think that we'll continue to see that progress?
I think we'll still continue to see progress, but it will have to be a rebound effect. When we look at AGOA, you know, this year, this past year into AGOA, $8.4 billion in African products came into the US under AGOA, that's duty-free. In previous years, it has been more. But what I look at is the diversification of the trade. This was a trading relationship so heavily dominated by oil. Now what we see are cars coming in. We see clothing item coming in. And these are the fundamental building blocks for industrialization and manufacturing. So I think that trend will continue. We have seen some contraction. I mean, I just read last week about, I think it was the children's store. They just canceled some AGOA orders in Ethiopia. And so Africa is now challenged to become more competitive. But in this COVID period, I'm seeing a lot of reflection and innovation, because basically African countries have felt Western countries were very much preoccupied, that they had to look inward and find solutions. But I'm confident about the AGOA trade because AGOA just makes sense. You know, we have been able to demonstrate since AGOA was passed that we are not replacing American jobs with AGOA. The facts speak to that. What we're doing in permitting African products to be exported into the US on a concessional basis, we're competing with China in the US market. And that's we've been able to prove. And that is helping us to keep our bipartisan coalition.
Yeah, that's a key point. And Rosa, you're the president and CEO of the Whitaker Group, a leading transaction advisory, investment, and project development firm specializing in Africa, which you founded in 2003. Where does TWG fit in the ecosystem of African economic growth?
You know, where we fit, we are a catalyst to the market linkage. You know, there's been a gulf, a wide gap between largely global investors in Africa. There are perception problems. There's a lack of information. So we know the continent very well. We've been active. TWG has been active since 2003. I've been active for more than 30 years. So we help to identify these opportunities for the companies, and we walk them through the process of seizing these opportunities. And we focus not only on the commercial dividends, but also on the human development dividends that, quite frankly, business and trade could deliver. But we're also active on the policy front. We're already starting to devise a policy for the new in Africa policy, a more robust trade and investment policy for the new administration in Washington that we hope will be accepted. And that is we're going to be looking at tax incentives to incentivize American investments in Africa.
And to wrap, what's your outlook for the continent's progress in technology, accessibility? Of course, accessibility is the key
Yeah.
for all, and the economy over the next 3 to 5 years and beyond.
Well, what I can say is that technology is my number one pick in terms of investments. I mean, you know, Africa has surpassed every prediction about its the vibrancy of technology on a continent. 650 million mobile subscribers. No one could have predicted that years ago. That would have outpaced North America and Europe. And when you even look at, and I'm so glad that you follow fintech, I think that is the area. And mobile payment platforms, I mean, that's nearly $500 billion in transaction last year on mobile payment platforms. And I think that if there's any resiliency against the COVID effect, it's going to be in the technology space. Right near where I am in Ghana, Microsoft has a Center for Excellence. We're seeing all of these incubators. We're seeing coders. So I believe that Africa has a competitive advantage in technology, particularly in mobile payment platforms, where it's already leading the world.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I'm the most excited about fintech as well on the continent. Rosa, it was great to speak with you. Thanks so much for joining us on Trade Talks.
Can't wait to have you back on the continent, Jill. Thank
I
you so
know,
much.
looking forward to it. And thanks for joining me. I'm
Okay,
Jill
stay
Malandrino.
safe.
All right, take care, everyone. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.